Hello and welcome to the Witches in Finland. My name is Sami and I'm a psychoanalytic psychotherapist from Finland. It is probably clear that there is no possibility to pass the subject of the Kalevala in a podcast that is talking about witchcraft in Finland. After all, the Finnish-Karelian and the spells and poetic traditions of the Baltic Sea peoples are so rich. Moreover, these myths probably have more to do with the 17th century witch hunts that we can imagine. The next decade is likely to witness a rise in the studies that connect the early shamanism and 17th century witch beliefs together. According to Sarmela, the Sampo, or more specifically the mystery attached to it, has been one of the prime subjects of Finnish folk culture studies. I'm not a professional folklorist or even witch historian, even I have made historical research myself, but I have searched this knowledge for you from well-known scholars in Finland. This podcast presents also a new approach to Kalevala and Sampo myth. My expertise is in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, and I believe that Kalevala can be an interesting way to understand psychological problems too.
Witches.
This podcast episode is organized as follows. Section 1 gives a brief overview of the book Kalevala and information about how it was collected. The second section examines the connections between Kalevala and the witchcraft in Finland. In the third section, a tale of the Sampo myth is presented. Sampo is my main topic today, and it is a kind of Cornucopia, horn of plenty, magic meal that can give you many kind of riches. In the fourth section, I will recommend shortly some movies about the Sampo myth, including supercomputers and kung fu. And analysis of the Sampo myth is described in the fifth and final section based on the cultural studies and psychoanalytical theory. The Kalevala is a Finnish national epic, a book based on Finnish and Karelian folk poems according to Hägglund and Hägglund 1985, Mr. Elias Lönnroth, who collected the poems of the Kalevala, also added many things to the work itself. The Kalevala as a book is not very old. The first work was published in 1835 and Kalevala as we know it in 1849. Mr. Lönnroth emphasized the rivalry between the two Kalevala folks of Väinöland and the north. Sampo poems have also been colored by fairy tales, so the text in the book is not straight from the collected poems. I have used also the original poems just to show you the differences between them and the published text. We don't know what Sampo is. In the Kalevala, it is a magic meal that grinds salt, grain, and riches. That is a kind of horn of plenty. In the original poems, many definitions of Sampo can be found. It is also like the horn of plenty that was once said to have been in Zeus' Greek god Zeus' possession. Sampo's destiny is to end up in the sea. In many stories and fairy tales, a self-inflicted miracle meal ends up on the seabed, where it continues to grind and produce salt. That is why it is said that the sea is also salty. What we know about how Mr. Lönnrot collected these poems and what he chose in his book is that Sampo myth is largely based on, especially from the poems of two narrators. One of them was called Ondrej Malin and the other one Arhippa Perttunen. Major differences in the Sampo poems is related to Sampo itself. In some poems, Sampo was just a lot of hunted animals, a boat full of meat to bring back home. The section 1 ends here. Next I will connect Kalevala and witchcraft. A recent research on this topic found that in the witch hunts of the 17th century there has been a lot of connections to earlier beliefs and mythology. Especially traditional healing magic has been shown to be a part of the witch trials. There were no doctors in Finland that time, but government wanted to stop the old beliefs, habits, and also the healers who used some spells or rituals. Even it was already usually done in the name of the new gods like Virgin Mary or Jesus. A growing body of literature has examined the connections between shamanistic tradition and witchcraft. There is sometimes a big difference also what people believe and what authorities believe, like question of metamorphosis. People believed that witches could turn themselves to animals, but this was not accepted in the demonology. There are also stories throughout Scandinavia in which only a few and the elect entered the feasts of the gods. It will be interesting to at least consider what is the connection between these rites into the witches' Sabbath narratives. According to Siikala, even lullabies depict the wonderful house of Tuonela, the underworld, the land of the dead. House that was built of bone and precious metals. In the Kalevala, many heroes travel to the underworld. As Siikala has pointed out, the folklorists have long time observed the similarity of the oral tradition between different cultures. However, mythologies have special features that are also local. The same goes for the witch hunts. In the north, the witches' party could even be quite modest in that time. There were ingredients on offer that were a feast for the Scandinavians of that time, like beer, bread, and meat, very common things. The journey to Manala is special and often needs some means of transportation. Usually you travel by boat or fly like a bird. According to Siikala, in the year 1658, woman Kerttu Nätyri was accused in the witch trial. She said that she had healed aches, wounds, and paralysis with spells. I'm trying to translate some of the spell. Jesus, wave a golden barrier, build an iron fence, set up a metal gate for security, make sure it is densely woven, and that it is high enough so that worms cannot get under it and evil cannot fly over it. According to Sarmela, the sorcerer layer is visible in every way in Finnish-Karelian tradition. They were powerful sorcerers and healers, both men and women, whom people visited to seek help and advice also in personal matters. In Finnish mythology, Tuonela, the underworld, represents also evil forces. In the shamanistic traditions, shaman travels to the underworld in a state of trance. Tuonela is also called Manala, or according to many theories, also Pohjola, the north. The north region is ruled by a woman, the Nordic mistress Louhi. The north in folk poems cannot be located. Even some scholars believe so. It is the kingdom of souls. I also quoted Marko Nenonen and Jari Eilola. Marko Nenonen, 1992, have found from the research literature of Finnish mythology 3 things that are of interest for the theme of witchcraft in Finland. First, according to folk poems, the Nordic mistress Louhi and wise man Väinämöinen, our hero in Kalevala, were arguing about the treasure Sampo, and they tried to harm each other through magical words. This was a kind of spelling contest. I will return into this later. Second, according to stories, the sickness and plagues were created in the north. I have talked about this in a previous episode. Also, I should add that when the spells were made against diseases, the curse was usually sent back to where they came from, for example, back to north. Third interesting thing is that in the folk poems, kateus, envy, is a synonym for the witch. The Kalevala is actually quite clean version of the original spells and poems. There is no need to think about why the poems were tidied up and the changes were made. The pious man Lönnrot could not publish the following version of poem. The whore queen of the north, Lovetar, that old wife, settled down in the direction of the wind, turned her ass towards the bad weather, became pregnant from it, became satisfied and stuffed from it, then gave birth to 9 sons. The 9 diseases: envy, kade, kateus, jealousy, is also the last son of the Lovetar, so basically the force of the witchcraft. Perhaps you are now a bit confused who is this Lovetar or Loviatar. You might want to listen my previous episodes to learn more about the birth of diseases. You can also read more spells from Sarmela's book. In the Kalevala, Lovetar is a daughter of the king and queen of the underworld, but in some poems there is no difference between Louhi and Lovetar. It is time to end this section and present important characters of the Sampo mystery. I have mentioned already Mr. Väinämöinen. He is a wise man who is a bit older person but very powerful, and usually he uses his musical instrument kantele with his spells. I should play you some kantele, but I didn't have that in my home, so I have to play some guitar instead. Secondly, important man is a blacksmith called Ilmarinen, Seppo Ilmarinen, who have the skills to actually make the Sampo. He is very skillful blacksmith. And last but not least, already mentioned queen or mistress of the north, Louhi, who has several daughters, and she rules the north with her husband, who is rarely mentioned in these poems. In the Kalevala there is also a third important man, Lemminkäinen, but Mr. Lönnrot has written him to this story to bind together his story and the Sampo story. Originally, third man was just some man from the Väinölä, Kalevala people's village, so I'm not going to talk about Lemminkäinen so much. Also, I should mention Aino, a young girl who had made suicide just before these happenings, a girl who was promised to marry Väinämöinen by her mother, even she did not want to. The story begins when the girl Aino has made a suicide by drowning herself. She is dead. Väinämöinen tries to find girl's body from the water, but he catches a fish. Aino has turned to a fish. Vellamo is called. She tells him how it is and suddenly escapes back to the lake. Väinämöinen is very sad and returns home. The ghost of his mother gives him an advice to go to the north and find wife from there. Väinämöinen is riding with his blue moose. Aino's brother Joukahainen is earlier humiliated by Väinämöinen and of course wants to revenge also the death of his sister. Joukahainen shoots with bow and arrow. Väinämöinen drops into the river and drifts into the sea. After Väinämöinen has been drifting in the ocean for a long time and eventually arrives in the north. In the Kalevala, he is saved and carried by an eagle. He cries many days at the shore, wounded and lost. Louhi, mistress of the north, arrives and asks, "Who are you?" The queen of the north, Mistress Louhi, offers him warmth and protection. Väinämöinen is lost and Louhi offers him information on how to return home, but as a salary from this information he wants Väinämöinen to make her a new Sampo. Väinämöinen does not know how to do this, but promises to send a blacksmith Ilmarinen. Väinämöinen comes home. He tells blacksmith Ilmarinen about the wonderful women of the north and emphasizes him to go and do Sampo. But Ilmarinen realizes that Väinämöinen has his own goals as a motive. Smith Ilmarinen, you everlasting craftsman, go and fetch the maid, look for the bared head. If you can forge the Sampo, brighten the bright lid, you will get the maid, for you pay for your work, the lovely girl. Ilmarinen is not happy at first. He replies, "O old Väinämöinen, have you promised me to dark Northland to save your own skin?" Ilmarinen doesn't want to go, and he even says that the land of the north is for the man eating the fellow drowning places. Väinämöinen gets him anyway attracted to the trip, and Ilmarinen arrives in the north. Queen of the north, Louhi herself, is the first who notices that the man has arrived. She rejoices and urges her daughter to beautify. She herself hosts and feeds blacksmith Ilmarinen. The Sampo must be forged from very small ingredients, from swan's quill tip a barren cow's milk, a small barley grain, etc. Whenever the Sampo is mentioned, its lid is also mentioned. A bright lid is the word. Since there were no blacksmith's workshop in the north, Ilmarinen looked for a place in nature and built it. He was assisted by slaves. The process was life-threatening and had many stages. First a boat was born, then a golden cow, then an aura. But he broke them all with dissatisfaction. And it was not until the third day that Sampo began to emerge. Ilmarinen begins to sue the daughter of Louhi. However, she rejects Ilmarinen and he has to return home. Mistress of Northland asks if Ilmarinen wants to go back home, and he replies, "There I have a mind to go to my home to die." When Ilmarinen arrives home, Väinämöinen asks if he have made the Sampo. He answers that yes, it is done and it is grinding all kind of riches. At this point, there is a competition in the Kalevala, which is probably partly Lönnrot's addition to the drama. Both Väinämöinen and Ilmarinen returns to Pohjola, and Ilmarinen has to do many things for the Queen of the North. Eventually, Ilmarinen gets the girl and Väinämöinen doesn't. There's a huge wedding in the north, and after that, Ilmarinen returns home with the new bride. Later, Väinämöinen is quite annoyed by the wealth received by the people of the north thanks to Sampo, and he attracts Ilmarinen to the robbery quest. Like expected, Louhi does not want to give Sampo willingly. Väinämöinen builds and uses a musical instrument called kantele to cast a spell for all the inhabitants of the north, and they fail to sleep. When people sleep, the men steal the Sampo and escape by the boat. However, what happens is that an ant urinates on the foot of a bird crane, and the sound of the crane awakens the people of the north. Louhi and her troops go after the robbers. Väinämöinen casts he uses magic and casts a barrier in the water that stops the enemy boats. But Louhi transforms herself into a huge bird and attacks. Louhi and Väinämöinen are fighting by using magic and spells. Louhi proposes to split Sampo. However, Väinämöinen does not agree with this. Louhi finally gets a grip on Sampo's dick with her fingernails, but Väinämöinen strikes her with an oar. In other stories it's a sword or spear. The nail breaks and the Sampo drips into the sea and crumbles into small pieces. Louhi, however, manages to hold the dick with one fingernail and transports the dick back into the north. From this, they get riches, and the rest of the Sampo is evenly distributed into the world. This is the end of part 3. I would like to mention shortly most famous films and movies. The Sampo was made in 1959. English name is The Day the Earth Froze. The film was made in cooperation with the Soviet Union, and it is largely starring Soviet actors and actresses. The film is based on the Kalevala, but does not fully follow it. Worth to watch. It's a bit campy with funny theatrical dialogue.
Sampo, tarinoista mystillisin, jonka arvoitusta ei kukaan ole kyennyt ratkaisemaan, saapuu nyt valkokankaille loistelijaana värielokuva.
My personal favorite is the television miniseries Rauta-aika, Iron Age from 1982. At the time it got bad reviews, but I think modern viewers can appreciate it more. There are a lot of well-known Finnish actors and a great text by Paavo Haavikko, as well as great music.
Niihin jälkiin rautanousi piilostaa.
Third movie is called Jade-soturi, Jade Warrior. It's from the year 2006, and it was a Finnish and also Chinese cooperation mythological kung fu movie. The film combines the mythology of the Kalevala and the Chinese narrative of wuxia film. The fourth and final film is the Kalevala, A New Time, 2013. This was the biggest disappointment to myself. There was a promising setting. Sampo myth is transferred to modern times, a technological application that connects directly to the human brain. Last part and best part. The philosophical question is whether it's good for man if he gets everything he seeks. Even neurological research supports the idea that exploration itself would be more important and at the same time give a sense of psychological significance. According to Panksepp, the seeking system in our brain is that which impels us to seek our environment for information that will help us survive. Sampo is like restless life force, but at the same time the seed of destruction has been sown in it. For depression, this shutdown of seeking is our natural response to the violation of yet another fundamental human instinct, our built-in need for attachment. Loss will spur ancient brain mechanisms of separation distress. In the Sampo myth, both Väinämöinen and Ilmarinen face a severe rejection and loss. Eventually, both lost their brides to the death. Only life-giving force is to start a new quest. In the Kalevala, no one really gets anyone. This, on the other hand, is typical of myths. Fairy tales end happily. Myths end in tragedy. As Stig Hägglund has put it, when a person's instincts are allowed to materialize without any boundaries, it creates fears. The condensation of these fears is like opened Pandora's box or a box from the movie Hellraiser. It literally opened the gates of the underworld. The robbery has to fail to survive psychologically, even it's frustrating. As Bruno Bettelheim notes, the myth differs from the fairy tale in that its events are magnificent, awe-inspiring and frightening, and could not happen to any ordinary mortal. The myth often has a more pessimistic tone and ending than in fairy tales. Myth is not an educational story as fairy tales often are. The heroes of the myths are superhuman. If someone asks if this has happened, we can say no, but it is happening now. I'm borrowing shortly Rosalind Rossignols article, The Holiest Vessel, Maternal Aspects of the Holy Grail, what the knights who have embarked on this quest of the Holy Grail desire most. Quote, nourishment, protection, and perfect union are all primal experiences arising from the original relationship with the mother. The quest fulfills those desires by appropriating metaphors of the mother's body, of physical birth and maternal nurture. They have become rejected, causing also feelings of shame. Vilja and Torbjörn Hägglund are Finnish psychoanalysts. The Hägglunds have interpreted Sampo folk poetry from the perspective of the Oidipus. The mistress of the north is phallic woman. Phallus is not like male sexual organ, it's more like an idea of the power. The mistress of the north is a phallic woman whose creative and fertile interior invokes envy. 3 men represent 3 possible attempts to solve the problem. And the third man is that Lemminkäinen. Väinämöinen cannot forge Sampo and tries to defeat his mother by phallic means. He makes a huge boat. His obstacle is his envy. Blacksmith Ilmarinen is able to forge the Sampo, but in the end he cannot leave it to the mistress of the north and the happiness it brings to her. He tries to forge a substitute for himself, a woman made of gold. But the result is unsatisfactory. He ends up depriving his mother of happiness. Lemminkäinen, this third man, on the other hand, becomes a knight of the mother and performs miracles in the world, rejecting other women. He destroys everything, eventually himself. The images of the witch or mistress arise from the fact that the mother unconsciously is perceived as a woman who, through her erotic attraction, also dominates their bodies and imaginations. This is also the basis of masochistic satisfaction. In the adolescent fantasies we can find these same themes, the struggle over who owns my body, mother or myself. In the original poems there are many references to erotic parts of the human body, but they are often cleaned off when they are presented in the epics of our nation. According to Sarmela, emerging cultivation cultures have often been matriarchal, and in the early villages of the Gulf of Finland coastal circle too, women appear to have held socially dominant position. This must be kept in mind when evaluating historical positions of power from the perspective of reality. It was women who maintained the kinship traditions of early agrarian cultures in archaic bear and wedding songs. Even in the Sampo poems, it was the mistress of the house who received visitors. She was the matriarch of kinship group and extended family. She ruled over the women's domestic community and the circle of houses. Livestock rights from birth to death were women's domain. Among themselves, the women took care of birthrights. It was their duty to look after the deceased, the ancestral cult, and sacred trees. They matched young couple in marriage and held the kinship weddings, washed and dressed the dead, and escorted them to the other world. The Empress of the North appears in various roles as a mother. At first, she is a caring and nurturing mother, but suddenly she is demanding and greedy, possessive and selfish. At the same time, erotic and seductive. Mom gives but also takes. Eventually, the phallic mother also shows her rage. She is the dragon. The mother retains ownership until the end. Mother also has a different magical power and wealth in her possession that can be envied. Woman's inner space. Part of man is initially to feel incompetence and inability. With cunning and skill, he tries to find a route. One does not want to remain in the power of the mother. There are no shortcuts. Relationship is one new way to the woman's world. However, if the crusade turns into looting, robbery, an attempt is made to steal the magical phallus of a phallic mother. This route cannot be completed. The matter sinks into the waves of the sea, back into the depths of the subconscious, from which crumbs emerge here and there. Today I will end here.